Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Grossman. I lead patient advocacy and engagement at GeneDx, and I'm really excited to have a conversation with this panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and as Pam said, you will have an opportunity to ask some questions, and even if you're connecting with us virtually, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. So we're going to talk about the drug development process and stakeholders that are along that process and how everyone has a different role. And you might have gone to conferences before where you've seen different stakeholders talk about what their role is in the process, but we have a real life example here that we're going to share with you. And I'll let the speakers introduce themselves, but take note of the fact that they are actually working together, all of them, toward a common goal, which is to help patients. So Janet, if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I'm going to say something. It's going to make some people nervous. You might even yell from the stage, from the audience, no, I'm just a mom. Listen, I know everyone likes to shake their head whenever parents say that, we're just a mom. I actually wear it as a badge because I have other titles now. I'll talk a little bit about our organization, but there is something about the very essence of our being on any panel or in any space that we actually shouldn't ever even like the idea of minimizing that. And I know that's why people say that to us, but I love the title. I am just a mom, first and foremost. I'm a parent of 3 daughters. Our youngest daughter is deaf. I'm a co-founder of Hands and Voices. We're a parent support and advocacy organization for families who are kids who are deaf and hard of hearing. And I'll just say in context to this conversation today, I remember the very first time in our community conversations about gene therapy or genetic testing education began to come on the scene, and I remember thinking, thank God, never in my lifetime will I have to deal or address this within our community. And here we are 10 years later, I'm talking about topics, and I know for you in whatever space you're in our community, different conversations come in that you need to begin to navigate. For us at Hands and Voices, we're an organization that really can be identified or defined with our motto, which is what works for your child is what makes the choice right. So whether it's language of kids signing and or speaking or cueing or a combination of all those things, whether it's education placement in public education or private education, whether it's self-identity of how our kids define themselves, we have always lived in a world of ambiguity to some degree. And so our motto has always sort of grounded us in any conversation. So when it comes to genetic testing education resources, or even these new conversations in our community, which is very complicated when you begin to talk about gene therapy or other types of, quote, treatments, that grounding has really helped build our own community and in what we're going to be talking about in our relationships with one another. So I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
My name is Amanda Singleton. I'm a genetic counselor. I've been at GeneDx for 14 years, so I did a lot of the report writing for some of the families in this room probably, and we've been open since the year 2000, so we've done a lot of testing over the years. But I currently serve in a role called the clinical lead for Biopharma and partnerships, and that's a really fun role to be in because now for all the patients and families that we've tested through the years, we can be a bridge to help getting therapies made for these families.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Gilstrap, and I lead the advocacy and community engagement work for Akouos. Akouos is a precision medicine company, and we're developing gene therapies for genetic hearing loss. Happy to be here.
We're happy you're all here. Before we just start our discussion, could someone start the clock just so I can be cognizant of time and not running over? Thank you. So what we're going to talk a little bit about is exactly how you do work together, because all 3 of you have very different roles. So Alan, share with us a little bit about when you were going into the community that Janet leads the community and just how you started that relationship.
Yeah, great question. I always believed and learned that our relationship is based on common goals and objectives. So I always approached Janet first to understand what was important to her, what was important to Hands and Voices, and what were their goals and objectives. And then from there we worked to find where we could work together around common goals and objectives.
And Janet, how did you feel about that, and how did you take on the relationship that was very new to you, because you said it was the first time you'd worked with a pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, I'm sure there are many of you in this audience who've had a lot of interaction with pharmaceutical companies. It was the first time we had ever been approached in our organization. And we meet we have so many diverse stakeholders, different kinds of companies and different things. So we've worked over the years with a lot. I've been around for a while, so I sort of know how to navigate conversations. And I have to say, when, Alan first contacted me, that there was a gap in my own life experience, or even knowing others about, how do you interact with a pharmaceutical company as a patient advocacy organization, or for us as a parent advocacy organization. So when you talk about relationship building, first of all, it takes time. So Alan and I were reflecting he asked if we could come to our offices and meet, and we still remember our very first conversation was 5 hours with no bathroom breaks or food. We got into a conversation, and this was a really important starting point for us, because not only did our relationship need to grow and begin to sort of understand each other, and it's easy to say that let's find our mutual goal. Our mutual goal will help us define our relationship together, but that actually requires a little bit of listening and understanding one another's exclusive goals, and then begin to sort of merge and find your way to what is that shared understanding. And so for us, what we really landed on, both in that first meeting and subsequent meetings, was the rights of families towards informed decision-making. So like I told you, the context for this conversation was around the idea that families have the right to make decisions for their own kids, and our job as a community is to make sure they have good information. And so that was sort of the context of the beginning of our relationship, I think, yeah.
So because you have such different goals, I want you to share with the audience what your goals are, because they are different, even though you're along the same journey to get to potential treatments. How are they different, and how do you work together to walk arm in arm?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so obviously, we're developing gene therapies. So we have an ongoing clinical trial, and so it's not my role, but it's our company's goal to find families to participate in this clinical trial, which is looking at an ultra-orphan rare genetic mutation that's causing the child's hearing loss. And so with that in mind, there's a huge gap in education, information, and so I think that is kind of the basis of our partnership, is around providing information and education to the Hands and Voices community, so that those individuals and families can make informed decisions around the path for their child, and whether it includes gene therapy or not, or a gene therapy clinical trial. That's not important to me. It's just important to me that they have all of the information they need to make those informed decisions.
So meeting Janet's community where they are, and how did you feel comfortable sharing that with Alan so that you could work together?
Well, the answer to that question, even within our community, is really complicated. So just in context to, 95% of kids who are born deaf or hard of hearing are born to hearing families. And obviously the uniqueness of deafness is that there's a culture and a community around the experience of deafness, where we live in a world where there's an intertwining of both the medical and the cultural within our community. So anytime within our space where people start talking about either treatments or the word that comes to a lot of hearing parents in the beginning of this is there a cure for it? And I know we don't like to actually, the way we even talk about it in our communities, but the context of the journey for us as parents in thinking about the experience of deafness as being a positive thing rather than a deficit. I can sit here and describe it how we evolved as a family to experience that, but every family who has a deaf or hard of hearing child will be across the spectrum in terms of being really open to thinking about what can we do to help improve the lives of our kids. Most of us are very hearing-centric. We can't even think about the idea that successful, thriving, wonderful human beings in this world who have never had the sensation of hearing do not view that as a deficit. So introduce the topic of treatment, whether it's hearing aids, cochlear implants, or even the idea that all families should sign with their child or not. This is a really complicated conversation in our community. So my ability to be across from Alan and talk about that, I could obviously talk about it from my personal experience, but those of us who represent families in any tables, we always have to be thinking about, we're here to represent not just our own beliefs and understanding, but those of our community. And so I knew from the minute we talked, as I began to sort of understand their goals from the work that they're doing, combined with what our goals are, it took us a while to find that space. And not only just in our conversations, but the minute I took this conversation into the tables where I'm at, it was a really overwhelming experience to be able to start representing the conversation that we needed to have about possible opportunities that were coming for families. And I'll never forget the day, because it was a huge emotional sort of outburst of this whole topic, whether it's genetic testing or gene therapy. It wasn't until a deaf woman in our organization said, why wouldn't we be at this table? Why wouldn't we? Of all the people that need to be at this complicated discussion, we should be at that table in order to be able to represent the patient or family experiences. So, yeah, I can't remember what the question was anymore, but
That's
there
okay.
you go.
So
You sound like a politician.
I want to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty, and then I want to bring Amanda in the conversation. So if you're trying to communicate, Janet, your needs, and then you have the extra layer of actual communication barrier of a hearing loss, how do you work with Alan, who, from what I understand, you hadn't had experience working in that community before. So how did Janet help you?
Yeah.
And then how does Alan help Janet? And then we're going to bring Amanda into the conversation.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I had a whole new language to learn because I had no experience with the deaf and hard of hearing community before Janet and I started working together. So Janet has been very patient and kind in the way she's educated me. And so it's my role to take that education back to our senior leaders and help them learn how best to communicate about our work to the public so that our language doesn't hurt, insult, cause further division, but continues to build bridges to that community. And so Janet's been integral part of that learning process.
I don't usually bring notes up to these types of panels, but I wanted to bring up what I call my Bible for pharmaceutical. And this was actually created by people probably here in this room in these organizations, but it's called Principles for Interactions with Biopharmaceutical Companies, the Development of Guidelines for Patient Advocacy Organizations in the Field of Rare Disease. This has literally sort of created the foundation for some clarity for me as an organization about how to interact, whether it was the complexity of possible funding partnership or even in terms of finding shared goals, what the role of patient advocacy organizations are. It really has been, I still use it to this day, it's really been a great guideline. So I do want to say that's how Alan helped me, is he's the one that gave it to me, including, which was interesting for me, this concept that for-profit companies who are competing with each other, one thing Alan has said to me over and over through the years is you should be talking to the other pharmaceutical companies who are also developing these clinical trials. And that was kind of shocking to me because a lot of times in for-profit companies, especially coming to nonprofits, there's sort of this inclination towards why are you trying to get to our community? You want us to use your product, whatever it is. And so the transparency from Alan in terms of his encouragement for us, like you need to be on the other advisory boards for some of these companies that are exploring clinical trials in deafness. That was a great learning. So I really appreciate, Alan, that you were sort of understood my learning curve in this world. And by the way, Alan's been coming to our world for about 5 years, our conferences, our communities, our tables. This is the first experience I've ever had in sort of the rare disease platform. So it's been, I think I have more empathy for Alan, who is always asking me questions about the words and the terms. I'm pretty stumped at all the acronyms being used here, so it's been good for me, so I appreciate that.
So you share the common goal of looking for patients, right? Alan wants patients to fill the clinical trials, and of course Janet wants patients to do the same because they both have the same common goal of getting to that potential treatment. But how do they do it? Because they both have limitations. So tell me a little bit about the limitations that you have, Alan.
Yeah, pharmaceutical companies have compliance, I won't call them restrictions, but challenges that we have to work within. And so we need partners that can help us accomplish the goals that we have. So GeneDx has been one of those partners. Hands and Voices is one of those partners. So all working together within our compliance lines to make sure that patients have and families have the information they need to make informed decisions about their own health.
And Janet, you're trying to find patients also because you want to build your community. You want to make sure families are getting the support that they need. And there are challenges to do that because they have to reach out to you, right? And how else are you finding them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because when you use the word limitations or us trying to find patients, the way I interpret or internalize that for our organization is really putting ownership into the opportunity for families to let themselves find what they need. So in terms of us trying to gather patients, it's really, and I think this is what you're talking about, the opportunities for families. Are they aware of the opportunity? Do they know? And I've said this from the beginning, which is, like right now, the clinical trials really is for a very small population of our community. But the minute we got into this, I thought to myself, this is not really about the 1% of the families or patients we're trying to find. It's really for the 99% that are not even eligible or part of the conversation right now. Those of you who are parents in the room, you can relate where something gets put on 60 Minutes and your mother-in-law calls and says, I hear that there's a cure for this or that. And so even for those who aren't a, quote, patient population, our community has to have a really clear understanding of what's going on right now, what the opportunity is in terms of a patient. So for me, when I think about finding patients, I really just think about parents who are informed, who have the information so that they can find themselves where they need to go. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Okay.
So Amanda, could you talk a little bit about how you reach out to really both sides of these stakeholders and the challenges that you see from your position of these two different stakeholders and how you can answer some of those challenges?
Well, at GeneDx, we don't have to find patients. We're finding them every day just by doing our testing, just by providing diagnoses to families. So this rare form of genetically mediated hearing loss, we're seeing these patients all the time. And I think we're often the first to know that a patient has a genetic diagnosis. So I think it behooves us, I think it's a duty for us to inform, to just make the information available to these families so that when the time is right, if it's ever right, they can act on it. If there's a clinical trial, if there's a natural history study, if there's a treatment available, we have that bridge to the ordering provider and to the patients to just provide the information.
So there are probably people sitting in the audience right now saying, what does that mean exactly? So share exactly how you work with Alan's company and you work with advocacy organizations.
Well, I think the first question that your company asked, which is the question that every company asked, is how do we get to the clinicians? How do we inform them? And how do we inform families? And so the way we do that is pretty simple. We're able to reach out to our clinicians and we're able to inform them via a letter. And when they get a letter from GeneDx, they don't get a lot of spam from us. So when they get it, they tend to open it. And we just say, hey, we think that based on your patient's genetic test results that you ordered a year ago or 2 years ago or yesterday, they might be eligible for a clinical trial. And then if that patient has opted in to receiving communication from us, we can also reach out to the patient or the family to let them know. And we don't demand an answer, we don't harass, it's simply to inform.
And then what about working with advocacy organizations?
Yeah, the other phone calls that I get and that I love to get are from organizations that are saying, are there others like me out there? And so that's something that we're also able to do. We're connecting families by letting them know how many patients are within our GeneDx universe that have the same underlying genetic cause of disease, so the same, have variants in the same gene. And if you just plug in with us once a year, we'll provide you that number and we'll keep you abreast of all of the things going on at GeneDx. If and when someone in your community wants genetic testing, we'll try and help you get that. We'll help you navigate that because it's not easy. I've heard a lot of barriers here at this meeting and the year before in San Diego, and we take note of that and we act on it and try to bring down some of those barriers.
So I want to take a little time to see if we have any questions virtually or if there's anyone from the audience. Oh, come on, I don't believe it. Maybe the light's in my eyes? There has to be someone that asked a question about this. I see someone pointing, but I'm sorry, I can't see with the light.
There's 2 hands over here.
Okay. Is there
Maybe
someone with
turn
a
the lights up.
microphone? There's someone standing up. I see you. Go ahead.
Is there a microphone?
Where
yeah.
can she find the guidelines?
Yes, thank you. It is published in the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases. Yes, Principles for Interactions with Biopharmaceutical Companies, the Development of Guidelines for Patient Advocacy Organizations in the Field of Rare Diseases. When we're done today, I'll just leave this. You can come up and take a photo of it if you want. Yeah.
The idea for that article was birthed here at a Global Genes conference.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit about the guidelines and how you utilize that on your first meeting and how it makes Janet more comfortable in other advocacy organizations?
Yeah, that's an important question. It is really important to me that Janet trusts me enough and we have a good enough relationship so that if I am asking Janet to do something that she doesn't feel comfortable with or doesn't feel like it would fit with her community, that she has the power to say no to me. And that was the kind of the idea behind that article, was to put the power of the relationship between pharmaceutical company and patient community into the hands of the patient community so that they are in charge of the relationship and they have the information they need to be able to direct the relationship. Because honestly, back when that article was written, many pharmaceutical companies did not have an advocacy role. So there were players within the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, like scientists and business leaders approaching the patient organizations with maybe inappropriate requests because they didn't know. So we wanted, the small group of us wanted the patient organizations to be empowered to manage those relationships effectively and transparently.
I wanted to just, there's questions. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Patient organizations as far as like drug development or clinical development and how that might inform sort of their process, or if it's more of just we do engage with the community. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you want real examples? I'll give you two.
Yeah.
When we were designing our phase 1/2 clinical trial, we had an advisory board with 5 families who have children who live with this gene mutation. And we asked them around the flexible parts of the follow-up of the clinical trial. We wanted to get their feedback so that if there were something there that this clinical trial was going to require of families that really didn't fit, we wanted to know that so that we could change it early on. Janet and I spoke about the way she's taught me about the language that we use. 2 years ago, Akouos was acquired by Eli Lilly. And recently, Eli Lilly's senior leaders asked that we would put together some communication guidelines for them as they were talking about the results, the early results of our clinical trial, because they wanted to use language that was appropriate. So, of course, I leaned on everything that I've learned from Janet over the years, and we put together a document that we could then give to Lilly senior leaders so that then when they were involved in press conferences and other public conversations, that they were using a community appropriate language. For instance, it's not always appropriate to say hearing loss, because there are folks in the hearing loss community or in the deaf community that don't see their hearing difference as a loss. So it's more appropriate to sometimes throw in hearing difference versus hearing loss. So that's just one example. I'm gonna let you answer that.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard the question. Did everybody hear the question okay? Yeah, so I think some different things, which is, first of all, I'm sure all of you as PAGs, patient advocacy organizations, we call it parent-driven organization. We've been around for a long time where we have a really high level of confidence that we're going to drive any conversations, even when there's money involved. Like, this idea that that what we want to do here in this relationship is going to have to be mutually beneficial, not just mutual goals, but to what extent will this relationship here at Hands and Voices be of benefit for the pharmaceutical company, and vice versa. And sometimes it's easier to get from that direction coming here. They want that we have access to the families, they want access to get that information. So for us, it's around information dissemination or informed decision making. So we know, so one of the ways we built trust was when we started talking about the possibility of Hands and Voices from the parents' lens, beginning to create resources for families. I told him right out the gate, we're going to be showing both sides of the coin in terms of, say, around genetic testing, why you may want to consider genetic testing and why you may not want to. We have a cross-section in our community who, for really good reasons, have chosen both paths. And so we said, we're not going to create materials that are going to try to sway parents towards one decision or other. We're going to put out all the perspectives in one document. And Alan was like, great, do that. I mean, so when you talk about relationship and building trust, to say, okay, we're here for mutually, we want the best for families. We want all families to make decisions for their own children. But in terms of being able to sort of navigate and being clear about what we wanted to do on our side as a parent advocacy organization. So I think too, our confidence around delivering resources to families from the parents' lens is really high for us as well. So for example, like when we're doing educational advocacy, we might not do a title called like Learn What Special Education Is. We'll probably call it Parents from Hell and Other Advocacy Myths, right? So our lens is what parents have experienced to where we want them to get to be. So like even creating information, we are parents, we're parent driven. Everybody at our tables, our parents are deaf themselves. So we like to think about this opportunity to create resources that parents will really resonate with, that will say, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly of all these conversations. Because often when we talk about parents getting information, you cannot expect one stream of information to be it all for families. So you cannot expect the information that a family is going to get across from their physician or the medical community is going to be complete. In just likewise, a family sitting across from a person with a lived experience of deafness who feels really passionate about the way they move through the world as a deaf individual, these are all pieces of the puzzle. For us, we stay in the lane of families. So we're thinking about parents need information from families, from professionals, from people with lived experience. You cannot forget as well that parents do not come to this as a blank slate. They're a part of other communities in their world, their religious communities, their cultural communities. So when we talk about resources and information, the building of this partnership was built on his respect for us, that we were going to build these resources, not just like a little video on what genetic testing means. We're going to sort of come at it from the way that families actually process the information. So that's just, I think, one example of that.
And I'll just add to that, genetics is darn complicated, and genetic testing is darn complicated, and it might take a few conversations or reading through a few materials to really help you think about it and make an informed decision. So one of the things we really tried hard to do is to make the concept of genetic testing and the options available and the potential results. All of that information is on our website and available. And we also have genetic counselors who can speak to you after the test is done, should there be questions. And what I'm most excited about is now we have another way for patients to get genetic testing, because again, we kept hearing, can't get my doctor to order it, or it's going to be a year before I get in for an appointment. Now you can go to Genome Medical, which is linked through our website, and you can get a test ordered. Now you'll go through genetic counseling, and they'll take a detailed family history and ask a lot of medical questions about you or your child or your family, and then they'll decide what test is appropriate for you. But that's another avenue for you to get testing, because again, we're trying to reduce barriers for those that want it. And if it's the right time for them to have it, we're partnered with them to do just that.
I'm glad you said that, because I didn't mean in my conversation that the only information families need is like word on the street types of information. We actually do need medical, genetic, medical information. So I like that. That's sort of the combination of how do you make sure that families have all information from different lenses. So yeah.
We have a question. Hi, so this is more so for the GeneDx. My son, he passed away from pediatric ALS. The gene mutation was SBTLC2. I donated his samples to the NIH, so I have Dr. Boneman working on it. I felt like he took too long, so I reached out to Dr. Timothy Yu, and I got him working on it. So it's been hard for researchers. They're like, well, you have the best. So they kind of don't want to touch it. But the only way that I can keep data on how many patients are being having the mutation is to continuously email them and ask them, is there any new patients? Would I be able to get the SBTLC2 mutation into GeneDx to help me keep better data?
The answer is yes. We need you to get connected to our head of patient advocacy, which is our moderator. What we'd love to do is keep our advocacy groups informed, again, about advances in genetic testing, about your number for your specific disease. And we'll share what we learn every year about how many more patients are diagnosed, again, because it's about building community, finding your tribe, and then personalized medicine. Maybe not a cure, maybe a treatment, maybe something that improves quality of life or gives some more time. And happy to talk to you after one-on-one. So very sorry for your loss.
Are there any other questions? I saw a few hands up over here when the lights were on. Yes.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Nicole. I'm with Rare Birds Foundation for ADSLD, and I'm wondering about how to expand how many panels this disorder is included on. Right now it's only on epilepsy panels, but we know autistic characteristics are part of the diagnosis. So, help.
So panels are outdated. I'm just going to be frank. Panels are outdated. There are new genes being discovered every single day by our research team at GeneDx and by all the academics out there in the world. And there's no way that GeneDx or any other lab can keep up with putting those genes on panels. And you don't have to anymore because there's this lovely thing called whole exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing. All 20,000 human genes all at once, and the data lives forever. And so let's say you get a whole exome test this year and we don't find anything, or we find something that's suspicious. We call it a variant of uncertain significance. You can come back to us in a year or in a couple years and say, look at my data again. It lives forever, and so it's one time. And now whole genome sequencing is out there. We're teaching payers that it's the next big thing and we want them to pay for it, but exome is well covered by commercial insurance. So panels were good when they were good, but the way to go now is whole exome.
But sorry to follow up, do you think that doctors are prescribing the whole exome?
We're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on it. I think that's part of, again, sharing information and sharing how much diagnostic yield improves when you do an exome, like double of what the traditional panel, multi-gene panel, chromosomal microarray, depends on the indication, of course, but the yield is there, and we've got guidelines now that are saying if you have developmental delay, intellectual disability, congenital heart defects, hearing loss, other congenital anomalies, epilepsy, seizures, first-tier test is exome or genome.
And I think, I see your question, just 1 second. I think this is a really important point that you're making. And I want to make sure that this example is shown for the three of you. So as you embark on this next phase in your community of entering into offering options of gene therapy, gene therapy, and getting genetic testing, and you and Alan will work together to develop materials that you can share options with your community. And Alan might call GeneDx for information on how might we include some information that is accurate so that families have the up-to-date information about the difference between panels and whole exome and whole genome sequencing. So this is a perfect example of how after this you will continue these conversations. There was another question.
Does it often happen that those have been diagnosed for a long time, do they do the exome sequencing to add to the data?
Say that one more time. It was a little difficult to hear.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Is it often that people who've been diagnosed or have had a diagnosis for a long time, do they do the exome testing to add to the data? Like, let's say they've had this disease and now they're in their 30s.
Are you saying they have a clinical diagnosis or they have a genetic diagnosis? If they have a clinical diagnosis, but they don't know the gene,
Yeah, the clinical diagnosis, because in our particular disease, Leishmanian disease, a lot of times they don't do the genetic testing
Yes.
on the older adults.
so that's where research starts, is knowing the gene. So if they don't have a molecular diagnosis, that can really start the conversation with researchers. And then with research, it feeds to pharmaceutical companies who can then develop the targeted therapies. So if they don't have their genetic diagnosis, and the disease is known to be genetic, monogenic, then they should pursue exome sequencing, with a caveat that there are some diseases that are not amenable to exome sequencing. The ones that have large repeat expansions, like the spinal cerebellar ataxias, there's a few others, which again, that's how you'd have to talk to a genetic counselor or learn a little bit more about the type of disease and the genetic mechanism behind it. But for the most part, there's 20,000 or so human genes, and they can be screened for by whole exome or whole genome sequencing.
Well, we're waiting for that. There's a question online about requesting once-a-year notification of others with your rare disease if you're not diagnosed through genetic testing. Can you request notifications?
We do that by, it's a gene-based notification, so we can tell you how many others have a diagnosis, a molecular diagnosis, so variants that are pathogenic in your gene. So we wouldn't be able to do that if you only have a clinical diagnosis.
But I think the question actually is, so if you're not diagnosed by GeneDx, can you still request the number of patients? And you can. Like,
if you're not diagnosed by, yes, we can still provide the number, yes.
So this question's for Janet. How did you and your organization prepare to disseminate this information back to your community, knowing that it was going to be really controversial?
Really messily. There's no, in some ways, but also linearly, like Alan and I met, I go back, talk to our staff, our board, we began to process this conversation. A lot of times when you're thinking about talking about something, you want to talk about like what is the bridge to that conversation. So because we've been talking about genetic testing in our community for a long time, that was a good bridge to talk about it. We know sort of the pipeline for gene therapy involves genetic testing. So that was a space we'd already been having a conversation. But when I say it's a little messy, we had to make a decision as a board whether to even allow a pharmaceutical company to be a sponsor at our conference. And so one of the ways we look at balance in our organization is to make sure our sponsorships have the lens of a lot of representation. So we made the decision to, and I'll never forget, the first year that Akouos came, one of our deaf community members came up to me and said, your organization just spent 20 years building a bridge to the deaf community, and you've just ended it now by allowing a pharmaceutical company in the door. And the really good thing about that was you have to be able to, when you talk about listening to one another, people need to be heard. And like, that was a good conversation to have. Like, well, okay, let's talk about that and be able to look at through the lens of that. And not that you can ever satisfy everyone, but the evolution of how we were able to build it then back out into our communities was creating a safe space for people to disagree with any side of the conversation. So think about that as the first year. This year we actually had 2 pharmaceutical companies. We have a really small conference, but we had 2 pharmaceutical companies as part of our sponsorship. And this was just last weekend, and Alan and I were talking about, think about how much the conversations haven't just shifted, but have created a safe space. So we did like a sort of an open presentation where it was really a conversation with the audience where everybody could come forward and talk about why, the conversation of genetic testing in and of itself. So we have always said from the beginning that our organization will be a safe space to disagree or agree with any conversation that we're having, as long as we think also, what is it that unites us? There's more that unites us than divides us. So you can't run an organization where everybody gets to say, I disagree, everyone disagrees with something and we're going to bring it. No, we really focus on what is it that really unites us all, and that is successful, well-adjusted, well-educated, thriving, language-rich, deaf children. That's what unites us. So the context for gene therapy or genetics is in context to that goal, and everybody agrees on that. So then we can come to the table and say, okay, so in that context, even the idea of why my child is deaf. My husband and I, that wasn't a big, huge question for us at the time. We wanted to just kind of do what's next. And in my initial conversations with families, I kept thinking that's kind of how everybody felt. And as I've got to know more and more families, some families can't move on to what's next till they know why. And I had to realize, okay, this is actually a part of the journey for families that for some it's really important and some not. So the ability within your organization to make sure that not everybody has to agree, but you better have something that you all agree on, so that then when you have areas of like the complexity of genetic testing or gene therapy, you can have those conversations in a safe space. I don't know, how's it been for you compared to the first year?
I think this past weekend was probably the most positive, but it's taken us it's taken us together a long way over the years to really bring the community along slowly, and I knew it was going to be a very challenging conversation to have with the community, and I knew that it was going to be a topic that had the potential to divide the community. So Akouos made the decision to not come in too hard, but to come in listening and learning first before we speak, and I think that's really been helpful for us.
Yeah, it's such a saying, like, you got to be a good listener. I'm literally reading a book called Talk Less, Listen More, because it's a skill. And in this relationship, Alan actually, I've seen him in hallways where people have something to say about this, and his ability not to even respond with, yeah, but we're just here for families to make good decisions, like being able to actually absorb and understand that and take that back. Somebody asked a question earlier, how is this relationship or conversations actually changing the way that they do business? And I think whether it's the pace of information, the expertise we need in our community from other patient organizations that we don't know anything about, like, honestly, we had to start saying, well, what about the decision making for clinical trials? There's actually, maybe it's one of your groups out here that have put out great resources on decision making process to be even involved in a clinical trial. That was not our wheelhouse. And so, like, even this conversation a few minutes ago, I'm like, there should probably be another patient advocacy organization in this conversation. The context to that exchange, I did not understand it at all. But so thinking about bringing in experts for other areas whenever you get into one conversation.
One more question.
I just wanted to clarify, when you say that patients can get updates on how many diagnosed are in your database, is that only people that have gone through GeneDx to get their diagnosis, or do you have access to like other global databases?
Just in our GeneDx universe, yes.
Okay. And also, you can find the principles for interacting with pharmaceutical companies, the full free article on PubMed.
Is there a question? So we have another one online. What are some examples of what GeneDx is doing to open access to genetic testing to patients and families?
Well, providing information is number one. because it takes time to understand it, to absorb it, to think about it, to talk to family members about it. We have opened up the relationship with Genome Medical, which is new, and we hope to see numbers grow there because I don't think there's an easier way to go about it. There shouldn't be a wait. You get the appointment within a couple of weeks, and you can meet with a genetic counselor, you can get the genetic testing, you get the result back through Genome Medical. We have a financial assistance program. We have an epilepsy partnership program, which if you meet certain eligibility criteria, you should be able to get genetic testing through us via whole exome sequencing. It's not panel-based testing. There's a lot of new things that we've come out with, and up at our booth upstairs, there's a number of handouts with QR codes that can give you more information on all the new ways that we support families who want testing.
I'm going to give each one of you 30 seconds to do your last thought, and Janet gets extra time because she asked ahead of time. So Alan, you can go first.
All right. I think the takeaway for me is that we can't do this alone. Pharmaceutical companies certainly can't accomplish our goals alone. And so we need partners. And those partners are built through trusting relationships, whether it be partners like GeneDx or patient organizations like Hands and Voices. And so I think we all need to think long and hard about how we approach those relationships and how we make sure that we have sustained relationships. So that's what I'll leave it there.
I think that we're here to serve patients and families as a testing company. We're here to safeguard your testing data and to make it available as you see fit to those that need it and want it to help get treatments made. I think we want to listen to you, so we are very open to feedback. And again, it takes a village. Mm-hmm. It takes all of us.
Just a couple things. Relationships really do make the world go round, and so had this process tried to be taken care of in just like the factual information of we have testing that's available to families, can you help us get our information to families, would not have been successful in the long run had we not taken the time to develop relationships and expand those relationships within our organization. Two other really quick things. Number one, this is kind of an ask of all the patient advocacy organizations here today. Our population of families who are deaf or hard of hearing, 40% of those families have what we call deaf plus other conditions. Probably some of those families are here in this room today who maybe have a rare condition along with deafness. We have to work together in terms of the very grassroots level. Most families who have dual diagnoses, deaf autism or rare genetic condition and deafness, often feel siloed in how they're getting information from within our own organizations for just general broad support. And so I think it's so important not just for us to think about our relationships with other industry or research partners or other companies that do this work, but it's really imperative for us to work together as well so that families in their own journey have some context to being able to share that. And this has been a great opportunity for me to be a part of your community today. Finally, I'm just going to close with a dream I had. I was standing and this was back when my daughter was identified as deaf. I was standing in a room actually kind of like this, filled with parents holding babies. And one by one, all the people started to disappear. And in deafness, 3 per 1,000 kids are deaf or hard of hearing, which we've always called ourselves a low incidence until I've met some of you where there's 100 in the world. But in this dream, all the families disappeared till finally I was kind of standing in the corner all by myself with my daughter in my arms. And feeling that aloneness. And I looked up, and there were 4 or 5 actually other parents standing in that room far from me, but all of a sudden I realized I was not alone, that there were others that were experiencing what we were experiencing, and we all kind of came to the center, and we're together. And I just wanted to encourage all of you who at any time feel alone. That's why we do the work we do in our parent and patient advocacy organizations at the very core. Yes, to change policy. Yes, to further research, to find treatments for our kids, but really so that all families have that sense of, I am not alone. So I just wanted to close by saying how much I appreciate all of you and all the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, if people want to reach out to each of you afterwards and have questions, can you just let them know how they can connect with you, whether it's on LinkedIn or somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look for me and message me there.
I'm also on LinkedIn or asingleton@genedx.com.
Same, and also handsandvoices.org. If you would love to just connect your resources to ours, we would love to do that on our website as well.
Well, thank you so much. And Janet, congratulations on your family meeting. Janet worked with us on this panel, even though she was in the midst of planning her family meeting. So thank you. We really appreciate it. And welcome to this community. You are now a part of ours.
Thank you.
And Amanda, thank you for being here, and Alan as well. Thank you all for attending.
My pleasure.